So when Germany invades Poland, again, there's this new form of warfare. You have this very fast military strike, but also these cleanup groups, this Einsatzgruppen, and these were specially trained units to murder specific parts of the local population. Number one on their list are Jews. Number two are going to be leadership, any kind of Polish leadership. In eastern Poland, where the Soviet Union takes place, there's also various atrocities going on and terrible things. Many Poles are going to be rounded up by the Soviets and sent off to Siberia. And ironically, many of those Polish Jews who survived World War II were the Poles who were captured by the Soviets and sent to gulags. And following World War II, they were sent back to Poland and then eventually made their way to refugee camps in the West, especially German. So very strange and ironic kind of happenings on both sides of these lines here. Part of this German policy of moving east was to create new German territories. So a part of this section that Germany acquires is going to be part of the Greater Reich, which means there's going to be a larger area of Germany. So if you look at the maps of this time period, this becomes Germany enlarged. There's another section that's going to be some kind of like rump puppet state of under German control, and this is going to be called the General Government. And the General Government is the Polish rump puppet state, which is really completely German controlled, but not part of the Greater Reich. And part of this policy of this greater enlarged Germany is to bring Germans from throughout Central and Eastern Europe back to Germany. And now, for hundreds of years, really since the 13th century, Germans had been moving eastward. Kind of when we think of America's moving west, you know, in our own U.S. history, in the 1800s and such, and their move westward. It's the same in Europe, but it was Germans moving eastward. And many Germans had been invited by various local kings following the Mongol invasion of the 1300s. So there's German populations, or there were German populations throughout Eastern and Central Europe. What does that mean? This means at one point these were settlers who spoke German and had set up small towns and villages throughout Central and Eastern Europe. There are still a few of these places left in Central Europe, but most of those Germans are going to be expelled following the war. But part of this Nazi policy is to try to bring these back. He wants the original Germans. He wants this pure German blood, and much of what he's seeking for is this Volksdeutsch, the people, the true German people. He'll send groups of scientists out and try to measure people's faces and assess their hair color and eye color and try to find these pure Germans. And they're looking for this ideal German. And they expect these quaint little German villages where perfectly cleaned homes and what they think of this rural German stereotype. That's not what they find in many of these places, much to their disappointment. But part of that is calling these Germans back. Now, because what's happening in the Soviet Union and their expansion eastward, many Germans who had been in the Baltic states, because this was an area where there was a large German population prior to World War II, many of these people voluntarily listen to this call and go to Germany. They go to this enlarged Germany, which used to be Poland. And what has happened is, as the Germans push through, they push people out of their homes to allow for these new Germans to come back, or these Germans that were throughout Central and Eastern Europe. So many of these were Jewish homes, for example. So the Jewish inhabitants have been killed, or have been arrested, or have been pushed eastward, or they were homes of Polish intellectuals, or those homes that the Germans have just requisitioned and have said now these will be homes for these Germans. So you start to see this mass population transfer that's going to happen during these war years begins here in Poland. And like I said, Germany takes over these Polish regions very quickly, and the race policy of killing Jews happens very quickly too. And we have these basically these small attacks in the early years. So 100 Jews are killed here, 1,000 Jews are killed here. We just have lists and lists of cities of and data of the number of Jews or Polish rebels or Polish intellectuals and such who are murdered. And a lot of people, these Holocaust deniers, it's just so ridiculous. It's hard to imagine, because the Germans, like the Soviets, were incredible takers of information. They loved data. They loved to amass data. There's paperwork for every action. So for every action into every town, how many people were killed, it's recorded. And oftentimes they'll say, 11 Jews, and I'll break this down: seven Jewish males, 3 Jewishes, female Jews, and 2 children. And as I mentioned earlier, this attack on women and children is highly unexpected. Even though Hitler had talked about the annihilation of Jews, everyone expected that this will be against Jewish males. And many Jewish women will remain behind in Eastern Europe and in Germany, trying to protect their husbands, trying to get their husbands to emigrate, try to find the papers and the paperwork, thinking they'll be okay. But the facts are that the majority, in terms of total percentage of those killed, are going to be women and children in the war, because they're left behind in a lot of cases. Many of the, and we're talking about, maybe 52% or something like this. We're not talking vast numbers. But in Germany, for example, right before the war begins, the number of women and children in Germany is much higher than German men, because many of the German men were able to escape in the early years or emigrated to other European countries. They later get caught up in the trap of the Holocaust in those countries, and then are shipped to concentration camps or extermination camps, where they're later killed. Poland becomes the center of the Holocaust. It's the largest number of Jews were in Poland, and because it was an area in which the eyes of the world weren't so able to peek upon, this is where the extermination camps will be established. And the critical years for that are 1942 and 1943, where not just concentration camps, but extermination camps. There's a difference. There's work camps, there's labor camps, there's concentration camps, where people are slowly starved to death or shot on occasion or more than occasion, or those camps solely for killing. One of the first camps for this is going to be Sobibor in Poland, Treblinka. Auschwitz is going to be a combination camp. It'll be an extermination camp and a work camp and a concentration camp. Treblinka is going to be the number 1 purely extermination camp, where no one survives. The only survivors of Treblinka, there were maybe 50 what we call work Jews who worked the transports, who helped sort the clothes and things like this. Less than 10 people, I believe, survived Treblinka. All those else who came were sorted basically and sent to the gas chamber very quickly. Tens of thousands of people arrived each day and were immediately killed. There was no hope. In Auschwitz, there was at least a selection where some of those who seemed deemed useful for work were able to survive. But Poland, again, and I'll talk a little bit about this more, it becomes the center ground for all this, because they have the cover of warfare, allowing them to try different plans of killing Jews and those who they deemed dangerous.